Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so honored and delighted that you have found us here on Crime Time on a Mighty Blaze at a special time of 3 p.m. ET because we have such a special author and such a special book that we created a special time just for him. And I cannot wait for you to meet Alex Hay in about 2 seconds. Briefly, as you all arrive, I'm Hank Phillippi Ryan, the host of Crime Time, the USA Today bestselling author of 14 going on 15 novels of suspense. I am so delighted and honored to say my current book is The House Guest, out right now, which went into a second printing after 6 days. Yay, thanks to you. And my new book, One Wrong Word, will come out in February, which is sort of scandal meets the undoing, something like that. Greed and gossip and revenge. But you will hear all about that when the time comes. I want to welcome all of you here today. I see Pamela Fry-Priest is here, and everybody is coming now too. Here's Lynn Henneman from Philadelphia. Welcome, welcome, welcome to talk to Alex Hay about his his debut, not only brand new, but new to everyone, the world of writing, The Housekeepers, which was out July the 4th, which is kind of funny since he's a Brit and lives in London, but we just sort of we Americans won't go into that. It's a caper novel that takes place in London in 1905. It's sort of Downton Abbey meets Ocean's 8. And so you can sort of get the vibe of it. But I loved this, you all. I love this book. It's so much more than a caper novel. It's fun. It's entertaining. It's a page turner immensely, and you will feel very, very smart reading it, like as if you learned something. But it is also quite thought-provoking. So I can't wait to talk to Alex about this. Sarah Penner, who we adore, the author of The Lost Apothecary, said, rollicking fun and entirely original. And that is absolutely true. Again, though, it's really more than that. So I will stop talking finally and introduce you to Alex Hay, who comes to us today from London. Welcome, Alex, and it's so nice to see you.
Hank, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I am thrilled to be here, and thank you for such a very warm and kind introduction.
Oh, my goodness, my complete pleasure. You know, you only get one debut novel in a lifetime, which is interesting and sort of touching to think about. What has this been like, launching your debut novel? It's been out for a week. Sherry says, congratulations on your debut.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, it's so lovely seeing you hold it up. It makes my day. In fact, I'm going to do the same. Ah, I love it. It's a very special feeling. I mean, Hank, you will know this. I'm sure it doesn't get any different. Over 15 books. Oh my gosh, I am in awe. But it has been an incredibly special week. It's surreal, actually, because it's a lifetime dream. It's the sort of thing I hoped would happen, and perhaps was really my only lifetime ambition. And so when it actually came to publication day, I think I felt slightly just in a glorious haze, but also slightly wrong-footed. Like, do I feel right? Am I as excited as I should be? And then I sort of settled into it and was overjoyed. So yeah, I have just loved it. And the magical thing has been seeing people start to send a message or two along the way to say that they're enjoying it, which is, of course, what it's all about, and makes it all feel entirely worthwhile. So yeah, it's been thrilling from top to toe.
That's wonderful. You see, Janine just said, way to go, Alex. That's a very, very American thing to say. I absolutely
love it.
But you went to ALA in Seattle, the American Librarians Association in Seattle, before the book came out. So you had sort of a practice time talking about it. What was that like, to talk to all those librarians?
Oh my gosh, I adored that whole event. It was thrilling for me. I mean, I sort of raced in, having flown in, and my body clock was, I don't know what day or time I was on, but I was faintly delirious, and having the chance to, in that state, talk about heists, big hats, big houses, bad men, brilliant women, and meet some absolutely fantastic booksellers was just a dream. So I loved it. People were incredibly welcoming about the book, and just that chance to talk to those very first readers was a real thrill. Loved it.
Bad men and brilliant women in London in 1905. I mean, you just can't, it's instantly cinematic. Wasn't it to you?
I mean, a sort of cinematic feel was really uppermost in my mind when writing. So, I mean, the story started from plot and structure for me. I was really itching to write a heist and thinking about those classic, wonderful heist movies. instantly sort of set me off on that slightly cinematic slant. So for that reason, I was longing always to have a big cast, loads of scenes, the most audacious, opulent, glittering backdrops I could conjure. And so that sense of what it could feel like with that sort of cinematic movement was always uppermost in my mind.
Audacious and glittering. You have done it. You have completely done it in the Housekeepers, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. I see more people arriving, and we welcome all of you. If you are new to A Mighty Blaze, we welcome you especially. We are so glad that you are here. Mighty Blaze was started at the beginning of the pandemic 3 years ago by the fabulous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us doing what we are doing right now, talking about books, discovering new novels, discovering new authors, meeting our favorite authors, and maybe meeting some new favorite authors. And we hope that is what is happening here today. As you can see how I read this, I just ruined it. I'm so sorry.
I love that. I'm so pleased.
And wrote in the back, I don't know. Meeting Alex Hay, who wrote The Housekeepers today. Let me tell you, we're having a giveaway. Two things. Don't let me forget about the giveaway. Alex and his publisher are giving away a copy of The Housekeepers to one lucky commenter. So make sure you leave a question or a comment or just general adulation in the comments, and we will spin the wheel of fun at the end of the show to pick a winner. You will win your, not this one. I'm not giving this one away. You will get your very own copy of The Housekeepers by Alex Hay. So let me tell you a little bit about Alex, and then I promise I'll stop talking. Alex grew up in Cambridge and Cardiff in the United Kingdom. He studied history at the University of York and wrote his dissertation on female power at royal courts. And there you have the book, combing the archives for every scrap of drama and skullduggery he could find. He has worked in magazine publishing and the charity sector and lives with his husband in London. The Housekeepers is his debut novel and won the Caledonian Novel Award in 2022. And as I said, out in the US now on July the 4th. So you can get your hands on this. Not right now, but when the show is over, run, and get your copy of The Housekeepers. You will not be able to resist. So, Alex, I want to talk to you this afternoon a little bit about the class system and research and power and women's empowerment, and a little bit of the dark side, and also about this fabulously, hilariously engaging, wonderful plot. I mean, it is a terrific story, you all. So I'll let you, if you will, I'm always afraid to describe a book, so you describe it. Would you tell us about The Housekeepers?
Of course I will. So The Housekeepers is a historical heist set in London in the summer of 1905, and it tells the story of Mrs. King, who is the charismatic, sharp-witted housekeeper to one of Mayfair's grandest mansions, who, on being unfairly dismissed from her post after many years of loyal service, decides to enact her revenge by recruiting an eccentric band of former servants and criminal associates in order to pull off the most audacious robbery that high society has ever seen, right under the nose of her former employers on the night of the grandest ball of the season.
I mean, you must be nodding at home right now saying, oh, that sounds really good. It's sort of Robin Hood and Oliver and Ocean's 8 and Downton Abbey and all of those wonderful things put together. You were talking about that you had always wanted to write a heist novel, but what was the first domino that fell for you in deciding about this particular book?
I think it was two dominoes knocking into each other. So heist was the starting point, that structure. From a sort of exercise perspective, I really wanted to try and write one, to work out the engineering of that plot and see if I could make one of my own. But simultaneously, I had been longing to write a story set in the 1900s because it's the most fascinating period. It's enterprising, it's audacious, it's got sort of old glamour of the Victorian period juxtaposed with these wonderful flashes of modernity. So new money, new technologies, rising fortunes, rising characters. It's just a very febrile, exciting setting to play with. So gluing setting and plot together was the starting point. And I had been reading a wonderful book called The Lost Mansions of Mayfair, which details some of these beautiful opulent mansions once scattered all across West London and now mostly lost to redevelopment or to the Blitz. And I began to think, what if some of the servants existing below stairs decided to grab a bit of the privilege upstairs for themselves. And so at that stage, it was about building that cast of characters sidling out of the servants' door under the staircase and thinking through who they might be. So I would say it was a combination of structure, setting, and then quite organically building that cast, all one after the other.
I'd love to hear about building the cast, because it made me realize how ignored the people downstairs were. That was part of their way of being. That was part of how the status of the world worked at the time, and how you could use that sort of invisibility and access to your advantage. But rewinding a little bit, you were talking about the structure of a heist. What is the structure of a heist? What did you need to remember and know and think about?
Well, to me, a heist has beautifully clear movements. So you have gathering your team, unveiling your plan, you'll have a million obstacles along the way. And of course, the beauty of a heist as well is there's got to be some very specific treasure to try and grab at the end of it. So all those good plot things, like a good, strong, clear goal, a heist gives you all of that. And then, of course, you get the chance to try and pull it off with as much razzle dazzle as you possibly can at the end. So for me, that sort of sense of clear movements through the plot was sort of calling to me when I started writing.
And the interesting thing about a heist thing too, and I'm just sort of thinking about this, is that in the structure of a heist, I think I'm right, is sort of the fun part is the planning of it. And we go along in the book, and we know, because you have smart readers, we know that the payoff is going to be not at the beginning, but at the end. That you're going to work toward this goal. Somebody wants something, and what will they do to get it? And then finally, we try it. Finally, they try it. Was it? And you had us rooting for the bad guys, who are the good guys, if you know what I mean. The people who are doing this heist, we want them to win. So talk a little bit about that, taking those characters, putting them through the paces, and at the same time sort of encouraging readers to be on their side, to be on the side of the burglars.
That's such a good question. I mean, I think my starting point was, I think a good heist leader needs to be a cool, charismatic, sharp-witted individual. And so building my protagonist, Mrs. King, was the most fun, because I imbued her with all the virtues that I would love to have. So she's got great leadership, she's incredibly resilient, she's got an absolutely undaunted sense of ambition. She also has some irritability, and occasionally is not very good with other people and needs plenty of alone time, all of which I can relate to as well. So all of that was just sort of delicious, putting her together. And then trying to think about the team around her. I wanted to have a blend of...
Let me just interrupt you for a second about Mrs. King, because was she the first character you came up with?
Do you know, that's a really good question. I think she must have been. But someone else asked me this, and I can't really remember. It always felt like an ensemble right from the get-go. But I think
you have Mrs. King, who was unfairly fired. There was something that happened. She was the housekeeper, the main housekeeper, in this massive mansion, the DeVries mansion. Something happens to her, and she wants revenge. So she decides to do something. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, in terms of what she wants and what she's aiming for, I could not give away too many of the twists and turns in the plot. But we meet Mrs. King on page 1, having just been dismissed for being caught in the gentleman's servants' quarters, which is a sackable offence. But why she was there and what she was doing, she will not divulge to the odious butler who is about to oust her from the house. And slowly, as the story unfolds, we peel back the layers as to what Mrs. King was up to on that day, that night, in the months prior, and what she's going to be doing in the weeks ahead. So slowly, piece by piece, we start to understand Mrs. King's ambitions are perhaps bigger than even anyone very close to her may realise.
And she begins to put together this team, and every character on the team is as adorable and charming and hilarious and cinematic and lovable in their own way as they could possibly be. Tell us a little bit about a few of those characters.
Well, I love that you say lovable because I love them too. And I wonder sometimes, will I ever love writing about a group of characters as much as I did in The Housekeepers? I hope I do. So we have Mrs. King, who we've discussed. My sort of joint favourites following her are Mrs. Bone, who is the financier for this audacious enterprise. Mrs. Bone is a criminal queen herself. She raised Mrs. King as a child and has taught her everything she knows about both legitimate and not so legitimate businesses. Mrs. Bone is, her bark is worse than her bite. So she's a rather bombastic character dressed in bombazine who will certainly have her own way if it's the last thing she does. So being forced into trying to go incognito inside this very beautiful house and perhaps playing the role of someone a little more subservient than she's used to being in her real life was quite fun to play with. So Mrs. Bone, I love torturing Mrs. Bone and sending her on many an expedition. But my other joint favourite character is probably Hepzibah Grandcourt, con artist par excellence, a decoy duchess who goes into the house to send the mistress into a bit of a tailspin and to make sure certain necessary seeds are planted in readiness for the night of the heist. So Hepzibah is full of gumption, grit. She's also incredibly difficult, occasionally very bad-tempered, but she's absolutely audacious and wonderful. I love her from top to toe. So those are just two.
And the two Janes, fantastic. And Alice the seamstress, who you use, I think, to connect upstairs and downstairs a little bit and introduce us to the lady of the house, who, as the book opens, is in mourning. Will you tell it?
Well, that's a really good point. So Alice, the seamstress, is effectively a spy, and she has been hired on by the mistress of the house, Miss de Vries, who is 23, who is has recently lost her father and has inherited this absolutely extraordinary and incredibly glamorous mansion. But her new money is looked at with absolute snobbishness by all the neighbours, and she is determined to try and engineer for herself a huge aristocratic wedding, thus deciding to set off on a mission to hold the grandest ball of the season and properly introduce herself into high society. Miss de Vries is, when starting the book, was probably going to be a quite straightforward antagonist. But in the writing, I actually fell in love with her as well, although she's a complex character who knows complex secrets inside the house, and her virtue and morality are not clear even to me as the writer, but she was a very intriguing psychology to get inside. So she lures in as many people perhaps as some of my protagonists are trying to lure as well. So it was a matching of wits upstairs and down.
And one of the things that might have made it difficult to write Miss de Vries is that, and being careful about this, is that in this time of society, you were put in a category of being a certain kind of person, and that there were boundaries of what you could be if you were a certain kind of person. And some of the characters in this novel are working to be something else, which was very difficult at that time. And I think you caught that in her. I mean, the most imperious, the most dismissive, and the most sort of needy person in the book.
I think that's really astute of you. And I think the thing that interests me about Miss de Vries is she's trained herself to within an inch of her life. And she has been trained to be perfect, to be immaculate and upright and alone. So she's cultivated her voice, her manners, her appearance so precisely. And actually, I find there's a certain tenderness to that, which sort of breaks my heart. But at the same time, she's ruthless. So although she has cultivated herself so carefully and she's honed herself like a knife, knives are sharp and she is too, and thus there's lots not to love about her. But that complexity was huge fun to play with, and I suppose as I built the story and built the world and built the dynamics between the different women at the heart of this book, that complexity lent itself to some of the turns of the plot.
Yes, we're talking about The Housekeepers. If you just joined us, the fabulous debut novel. I would say we're holding it up in Boston and in London, and I think that's really wonderful. I mean, I think even in 1905, what you're talking about is women who have to do what they have to do. They want something, and they're going to go after it, no matter if they're upstairs or downstairs. And speaking of upstairs and downstairs, this house in this book, Alex, is it based on? Renee says, "Oh, Alex, your novel sounds incredible." Yes,
Oh, Renee, thank you.
it is. The Housekeepers by Alex Hay. This house, I kept envisioning it, and it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger in my head with the uh, draperies and the furniture and the marble and the flowers, the infinite flowers throughout, and the silverware. And I don't know. You talk about it. Is it real? And where did that come from?
Oh, I could talk about this house for days, and I'm so glad you enjoyed it as well. And in fact, it got bigger and bigger and bigger in my imagination, let alone upon the page. So it's not based on any single real house, but it is a composite picture of probably multiple mansions that were once strewn all across West London. And as I was mentioning before, have now mostly been completely lost. So I did turn to various archive accounts of some of those houses and read a great deal to try and work out, to your point, what was in the house. So what was the quality of the carpets and the mirrors and the chandeliers and the flowers and the draperies? How could I try and make sure that some of those details were as accurate as possible? Because it was pleasing to me to know that you would open those beautiful pillared doors and see some objects inside that came, if not from one single home, from a smattering of them around Park Lane. I would say that one of the most wonderful things to do was to try and draw the map of the house, so that I could have some clarity in my mind of where that enormous ballroom or boiserie or dining room or upper quarters winter garden, all the rest of it would be sitting. But I have to admit to you, I wrote that map after we were basically at the end of copy edits, or indeed had done those already. I think we were probably motoring towards publication. I really should have done it at the time because I was trying to hold it all in my mind while putting the plot together. And I really could have saved myself a lot of headaches along the way had I just sketched it perhaps a month or two earlier. But yeah, loved the house. If I could live there myself, oh my gosh, I would.
Oh, I suppose, but you'd need a whole staff for that. You would never even begin to go to all the rooms. And maybe the fact that you didn't make the map allowed you to make it bigger. There were no boundaries when you wrote the house, and that comes through so gorgeously. I mean, you were talking about the carpeting and the draperies and the furniture and the appliances and what was the where. Your research in this novel, Alex, is so seamless. It's so authentic that it feels like we are just there. That is, sometimes in novels, it feels like the author has, I don't know, investigated, researched medieval swords, and by golly, we're going to hear everything about medieval swords. But this doesn't feel that way. You really put us there. How did you do that?
Well, I love to read historical fiction. I adore all the textures and tones of the past. So all the details you were mentioning are all the things I love the most. But when writing, I like to just motor into the story, crack right on, and then as we find ourselves in a room or in an alleyway, then I want to know what the details are. So for me, my research was quite pragmatic. I suppose over the years, there was lots I'd absorbed by osmosis. But when I was in the plot, I would pause and work out, okay, what is it that I need to know about this street, this house, this turn? What invention would most help my gang perhaps pull off one section of the story? And then I would go down many, many, many beautiful rabbit holes to try and find the answers. But it was always about pragmatism and trying to stay focused on what direction is the story going in, and then where and when should I weave in the right level of detail so that the reader is in it with me, but not overloaded.
But it's not only in the house, though. I mean, people's clothing and their language. And I hadn't heard the word electrolier. Is that it, like chandelier? I had
Yeah,
never
yeah,
heard
yeah,
that
yeah.
before. And so whole new worlds opened up. How did you? So this is all sort of your history of your research added to your vision of the story, and then it all sort of rolls out.
Yeah, I mean, that again is such an astute question because this is why I loved writing a book set in 1905, because there's a real twist towards modernity there. So we don't just have chandeliers, we have electroliers, We have electricity chugging through the house. We have people driving motor cars, not just being in horse-drawn carriages. And I think that blend of sort of old world and new felt really delicious to me, because it, to me, lent a caper story an added sense of movement and fun and life and nowness, which I think was really pleasing to me when putting the book together. So being quite careful about, okay, in 1905, could we turn the lights on? And were we pulling bell pulls, or were we twisting little knobs? All of that, I loved all of that, because that's all the kind of tactile detail that makes me feel as though it's real.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and the clothing too. The clothing is so unbelievable. We are introduced to it by not only by uniforms, but by the costumes or the styles of the times, and again by Alice, the seamstress, who's a fashion designer and would have been a fashion designer today, but back then she was a seamstress and a little bit of a spy. The one of the things that's intriguing, and again, Janine is saying, hold up the book again. Okay, we'll hold up the book
Ta-da!
again. Not too much. This is about, we're talking
I
about.
could hold up this book all day, so delighted to.
I just put mine on the door behind me. You could casually just sort of held up all the time. Priya is saying Electrolayer is my new favorite. We're going to talk about that. But and I can't tell you, audience, enough how entertaining this book is, how much fun it is, how surprising it is, and how intriguing it is. But at some point in the book, there begins an undercurrent of something that's a little darker, and it changes the story in a gorgeous way, like sort of dropping a drop of iodine in a glass of clear water. It just, you think, oh, I see this now in a different way. It's wonderful. I don't want to even talk about it, but you wouldn't have had to do that. At some moment, why did that just evolve? Did it just turn out to be kind of true, or what happened?
It did evolve. I mean, it's lovely for me to talk about the delicious gloss and glamour of the 1900s, but it doesn't take much to scratch beneath the surface of that and find gargantuan levels of corruption existing just underneath all the gloss. And it was important to me to try and think through the fact that this beautiful, opulent, splendid house was built on the back of corruption and exploitation, and therefore it felt necessary to reflect some of that. And without giving away any turns in the plot, it doesn't take long when researching the service trade to also find the dark side of that, and to realize the potential exploitation that was faced by many people, particularly young women, and therefore understanding that would have been shimmering in the background even for people who existed at the time. Thus it shimmers somewhat in the background even within this world, but I hope in such a way that the light and joy of the story is not lost.
No, I think the light and the joy of the story is enhanced by it. I mean, it really makes it realistic, and it makes it all the more believable, and it makes the motivation be incredibly powerful. We're talking about The Housekeepers by Alex Hay. There's so many wonderful scenes in this, but the party at the end that Ms. DeVries is given, the ball that she's set up, is so hilarious. It is like Aida, like watching the opera Aida with the elephants and camels and the Nile and costumes and the performances throughout. Were there balls that were that wild?
Do you know, I think there were. So this was one of the most wonderful parts of my research. So we had fabulous costumed balls in London in the 1880s and the 1890s. So the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire held the legendary Devonshire Ball at Devonshire House in 1897, which was attended by the royal family, everybody in beautiful costumes, so lots of inspiration there. And actually, as we went into the 1900s, some fabulously audacious parties. So people flooding their courtyards and setting up wild animals and all the rest of it. I had to just take every single little delicious bit of all of that and put it into one big mega party. So it all got thrown in for this ball on Park Lane. And yeah, gosh, what a night that is.
Well, yes, and standing ovation for that. And I want you all to read the housekeepers. I know I can say this. I want you all to read the housekeepers, especially for Miss DeVries' dress and headdress. I mean, I want that, and I want to swan around in that outfit. Although I wonder how heavy it was, but the level of detail in this book is absolutely unimaginably transporting, and I wonder about that, and then we'll get to questions from the audience. I wonder about your writer's head when you're putting yourself in 1905 in this milieu. How do you have to do that? Do you have to move yourself into someplace else? I mean, quickly, and I know I'm taking too long to ask this, but you have to be Alex writing it, being a good writer. And then you have to make sure that you're doing this justice. Then you have to make sure that your story, is clinically holding together the setting and the characters and the plot. And then you have to sort of be somewhere else entirely. So talk a little bit about what that's like.
Well, that is a wonderful writer asking me that question, I can tell. So I think for me, it was absolutely about moving between those different modes. So I think, first of all, I was trying to make sure that I was just getting that first draft down and moving through the plot as quickly as possible. And later it was about layering in those other elements. I mean, some of the research and some of the texture was there from the first draft, but some of the details you're mentioning, like the dress that Alice creates for Miss DeVries, that would come perhaps in the second draft. It was very functional in draft one, and then I would build, mold, create, find the right details and beat it up as the book went on. So I think it was always a shifting between, as you say, that kind of, right, am I telling the story as quickly and as efficiently as I can? And then am I layering in the details that I will love and hopefully a reader will love as well?
But then also in putting yourself in the time. I mean, you are living in a time that there are cell phones and Diet Pepsi and television, and you're not in 1905. So how do you put your brain in another time?
That's such an interesting question. And I don't think anyone's asked me that, and I don't know. I think I just do it. It's nice to go there. And actually, for me, this book was always escape. I mean, I love historical fiction because it is escapism. It's a fantasy. It's a past that we can never revisit. But of course, there's that knowledge that you're trying to find as a reader, some of the details that are true. You're trying to learn something about the period. So for me, it was always just a joy to sink into that world. And I suppose, if I'm honest with you, if I think about it, I would just close my eyes and picture moving through these spaces, whether opulent or not, and trying to work out, looking around me, what's around me, and through research, then trying to populate that, piece together that world. So yeah, I suppose it's just an act of fingers on the keyboard, closing one's eyes, diving in and seeing what's there.
And what was there is completely marvelous. The Housekeepers by Alex Hay. It is a gold mine. It is hilarious. It is beautiful and cinematic and wonderful and touching. And really, this is one of a kind. This is, well, is it though? Because in your author notes, you said something like, and I wrote this down, you said you'd like to see the housekeepers go off into the sunset or to their next enterprise. What is that code for?
Do you think I was possibly setting myself up for future endeavours, cunningly as I possibly could? I mean, I have been writing another book set in the same world as The Housekeepers, but starring a fresh cast and a new dastardly scheme. So to me, this is a world that is just stuffed full of crafty, cunning, charismatic, clever, fantastic people who are all out to get their just desserts and perhaps off to run a con or a caper or two along the way. So I think the stories left untold from this world are playing in my mind. So if I am lucky enough to be able to do it all again, pray for me. Then maybe there could be more.
Well, prayers are lovely, and I'm sure they'll be helpful, but you don't need them right here, Alex, because this is a marvelous book. This is a tour de force and absolutely fantastic. And I know all of you will absolutely love it. So run, run, run and get The Housekeepers by Alex. Hey, let's take some questions from the audience. Margaret Pinard says, put that back up again. Margaret Pinard says, auto buy. Yes, absolutely.
Loved that. I agree. I would too.
Margaret, you will love this. Margaret is a wonderful author herself and a big fan of historical fiction, and this will be your new favorite novel, I promise you. Renee says, Alex, how did you celebrate your dream coming true?
Do you know, that's such a good question. I haven't told this story. So hilariously, when I first found out I had an offer of agent representation, I had been going to a work event on the same evening, and I'd had to go in black tie. So I was fully suited and booted in bow tie, jacket, smart shoes, and got the text on my phone.
Oh.
I got the email on my phone and came home, and I had to open a bottle of champagne there and then. And so there's photos of me looking very, very tired and slightly worse for wear, while in full black tie. So I feel as though, yeah, that was my getting an agent moment.
I love that, your full author photo moment.
It was hilarious. I really loved it. I'd been carting this bottle of champagne around for years. I think, gifted it many years ago for reasons that have long escaped me. And I said to myself at the time, this is like 12, 14 years ago, and I said, I will open this if I ever get an agent. I tell you what, I have hauled that bottle from apartment to apartment, from house to house for years, and it was covered in dust and an absolute disgrace, and not very tasty by the time I finally opened it. But I had held out, and finally having that sip of rather warm elderly champagne while dressed in my bow tie was how I celebrated. So I will always remember that evening.
And you all listening to that story, that is Alex Hay, the storyteller. And that is completely what you're getting in this book, that voice, that understanding of people's motivations and thoughts and desires and what's in their hearts and what they love and what they do. That's just all here. It is marvelous. Let's take a couple more questions if you have time. Diane says, do you have much input on the cover? I love it, and also love skeleton keys. Is the UK cover different?
The UK cover and the US cover are not a million miles away, because they both have a sort of blue and gold loveliness to them. So this cover was beautifully created by the amazing, phenomenal, terrific team at HarperCollins. And I just adore it. It's just so wonderful. So I was lucky enough to be able to say yes, yes, yes. But no, all the sort of magic and thinking through what will be right and right for the market all very much came from them.
And Margaret is loving Melissa is loving your purple chair too.
I love this purple chair. Well, do you know, I wrote most of this book sitting in this chair. So I've had to move it to near the window so you can actually see me, because this is a very dark and gloomy room otherwise. But yes, I love this chair too.
Who else has a question? Do you have a favorite character? Sherry. Hey, Sherry. Do you have a favorite character in this book?
Good question, Sherry. So I have to say, ultimately, I do love my protagonist, Mrs. King, the most, which is a tricky one, because Mrs. King is my sort of cool-headed heist leader. She can be chilly. She's remote. It's not always easy to get to know her. And even as I was writing the book, there were times when I felt her keeping me at a remove. And I had to really try and scrape beneath the surface to understand who she was. But when I think about the final pages, which I won't say anything about, my heart sort of glows with love for Mrs. King. So I think ultimately, when all is said and done, she's my favourite. But my other favourites, Hepzibah and Mrs. Bone, I mentioned, but I have to give a shout out, because Hank did, for the Janes. The Janes, my two trapeze flying housemaids, are probably my two favourites. And I was saying to someone the other day, I didn't know if I would manage to actually get away with having two housemaids called Jane 1 and Jane 2. And I was just hoping that they would make it through the editorial process. And it's so lovely and gratifying to know that the Janes are often people's favourite characters. So yeah, viva la Janes, they're among my favourites.
I so agree. I burst out laughing at Jane 1 and Jane 2. I mean, not metaphorically, just actually, literally burst out.
Oh, so, me too. I love them.
Marvelous. Renee says, hey Renee, do you have a strict writing schedule for yourself? Is there a time of day or night that you prefer to write?
yeah, so I think discipline was the only thing that got this book done. So I was writing it all around work. So day job is I work for a charity, and so very much mornings or evenings or weekends. And then I would sometimes take some time off work to just do really focused writing stints, which is how I got the first draft really done and dusted. As much of a bonfire as it was, it just had to I had to motor through. So I love writing in the morning. I wish I was an earlier riser, but I don't have the discipline I require to go to bed as early as I need to go to bed to get up on time. So if only I was a 5 a.m. writer rising with the larks, but I'm sadly not quite there. But one day, every year I say to myself, this is the year I'm going to be the best and most efficient morning writer you have ever seen. But
I'm not going to be helpful with that. I'm not sure that's a good, I love to write late at night. I am much better.
Yeah. You're a night owl. Interesting.
We all do what we need to do. And there's no reason to try to, it is working, I can tell you, Alex. So just go with what you have. One last question. Will you be participating in a physical book tour? If so, will you be coming to the USA?
HarperCollins, can I come to the USA? I would love nothing more. So I'm doing physical book tours here in the UK, which is going to be so thrilling. I cannot wait to meet readers. I'm slightly daunted, but I'm also just so excited. And if the opportunity ever arose to come to the States, oh my gosh, I would love nothing more. It would be amazing. And the reception from readers in the States so far has been so warm and so encouraging. And I would just love to come and chat about the book and talk big hats and bad houses and all the rest of it with all of you. It'd be wonderful.
We can all dress up and come to the event. We will all be there.
Woohoo! I'm so on board with that.
To hear Alex. You all, we could talk for so much more time about the Housekeepers, but let's see who wins a copy of this marvelous book. And then when it's over, the one of you who doesn't win can run. Everybody but her can run and get your own copy of the book. And the winner is the suspense. Sherry Steuben. That's wonderful. Woo-hoo. Terrific, Sherry, and you asked such a marvelous question. Thank you so much for participating today. So you'll get a message about who to contact. That will be me, and I will let you know, and we will get you a copy of Alex's book right away. Alex, thank you as we wrap up. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope the wave of Alex love is going to continue. I predict that.
Thank you so much, Hank. I just love talking to you. It's such an honor to speak to you. And I am so in awe of you about to celebrate book 15. I can only dream of matching those heights. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you. And everybody.
My pleasure. I absolutely loved it. And I adore your book, The Housekeepers by Alex Hay. Now, you stay right there for a minute while I tell you quickly that our usual edition of Prime Time at the regular time at 4 p.m. ET. Today will be Samantha Downing, A Twisted Love Story. There could not be a more different book from The Housekeepers than the fabulous Samantha Downing's A Twisted Love Story, which is dark and gaslighty and contemporary and surprising. And Samantha is wonderful. So you will hear from her in about 15 minutes. So go get a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or lemonade or whatever it is that you have at this time of day and come back and we will talk to Samantha Downing. Meanwhile, run and get The Housekeepers by Alex Hay. We will see you in 15 minutes or we will see you next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET when we will have, look at that cover, A Likeable Woman by May Cobb. Do you think that the title is a little sarcastic, ironic? Maybe so. And we will talk to May Cobb next week. Meanwhile, I'll see you in 15 minutes, I hope, with Samantha Downing. Alex Hay, thank you so much for being here today. And remember, you all, it is always safe inside a book. And we will see you next time.